It's not really the Fugitives Trail. It's a kind of generic thing for the way that we're going. But basically what's happening, you know what's going on the front of the camp. The left horn is coming over this ridge here, and the right horn is already down in the valley down here. So what you have are the two horns sort of trying to move together. But one of the Zulu accounts says, oh, there was fierce resistance and they never quite managed to get the two horns to actually meet to stop anybody getting through. But then, so you've got that going on, and it's kind of moving as they're trying to head the whites off. But of course the whites then are trying to get through in between. You've had serious resistance up there on the neck. We were looking at all that yesterday and the monuments there. But be aware that throughout all of this here there are these clusters of graves. These are not necessarily people running away. They are actually probably groups of soldiers from those stands who've broken away and been pushed over here and are fighting their way down the valley here. One account actually says as many people were killed on this side of the neck as on the other. So there was a lot of fighting. When you look at the map of cairns from 1884, there are lots of them down here, and we'll see clusters of them as we go down. Now when you see them, if you find 5 or 6 in a row, it doesn't mean that they all died in a straight row like that. It means they died over that area and they've dug the graves in a row. But they will, to my mind, have all been killed in that sort of particular area. You wouldn't carry, by the time you were burying the bodies, the remains that far. So you're going to decide, okay, there's a lot of dead people just around here, let's dig the graves and bring them in and put them there. So in that sense, each cluster of graves represents an area where a number of people were killed, and when you've got a lot together, then that's almost certainly people who were fighting and who were overwhelmed. They're probably not going to have much ammunition by this stage. Certainly the stands on the neck ran out before they were killed, and even if they have been resupplied during the battle, by the time you get down here you've probably got through most of it. So these are going to be men who were going to be doing old Tim's fighting, withdrawing clumps when they're trying to keep together and keep the enemy at bay with the bayonets. The Zulus potentially are going to slightly avoid the areas of resistance and go after the individuals. There would have been civilians, there would have been African auxiliaries, there would have been men on horseback, all trying to get away through here. And obviously quite a lot of them are killed at each stage along the way, and it goes down into the bottom of the valley where, in my view of things, the last organised resistance takes place, and then they just, from that point on, they are fugitives. The broken down survivors are then just trying to flee across country and get down to the river. Now, I'd mentioned to you when we were looking at fugitives, I don't think that they were particularly aiming for there. If you look, the tree's in the way, but you'll see if you look down there where the road is, to the left of it, there's Shiani, that's where Rorke's Drift is. So even when you're coming down here, you know that Rorke's Drift and the British side of the river is over there. You can't get there because there are Zulus in between, so you're trying to find a way through in that direction. I don't think really anybody was thinking, oh, I know, there's a flooded drift downstream from Rorke's Drift, let's go to Sotondosas instead, because it wouldn't have been that well known. But just get away and head in that direction is the plan. Now, we talked yesterday about the artillery, 2 7-pounder field guns that were out in the centre of the British line. When the British line withdraws, the gunners limber up the guns and they pass through the camp and they come over the neck here. Now, there were 2 officers, Major Smith and Lieutenant Curling. Major Smith is subsequently killed at Fugitives Drift, and Lieutenant Curling survives. Curling says, oh, we thought we were sort of falling back to rally. Now, that could be that he's just covering his backside after the event and saying, well, you know, we were going to go back and fight somewhere else. But I think when they fall back from that forward position, they are thinking of rallying on the neck. So it may well be that he had that impression because that was what they were being told to do or whatever. But of course, even by the time they get through the camp, the Zulus are streaming in from the front. The Umbonambi Abuto is bursting through the lines, and he said, well, the gunners were running alongside the limbers and most of them were killed as we went through the camp. And they come over on the road. Well, they can't get through the road because the Zulus are there, and they turned left across country, and they came across here. Now there's a huge sort of chasm further down which we'll be looking at in due course, and for many years it was thought that they came to grief there, although it would be very difficult to get limbers anyway through that terrain. In fact, they didn't. They got stuck here. They talk about them being stuck in a donga, or the horses struggling to get through this donga, and the Zulus are right there, and of course as soon as they start to slow down, the Zulus are stabbing the horses and pulling the men off the limber and stabbing them. Now this feature, probably looking at it, appears to have silted up a little bit. It was probably deeper at the time. You can see here where you go through, there's actually quite a drop just down there, and that may well have been steeper in 1879. And they come here and they get overrun and everybody's killed. The two officers, being mounted separately, managed to get away, but everybody else is killed. When the burial details came back, they talk about finding the limbers here with the horses sort of hanging down the edge of the drop, still in their harnesses and all the rest of it. How do we know that it was here? Well, if you look just under this tree, there's a pile of stones which is in fact a cairn. And when we did the archaeological survey in 2000, we were allowed to excavate that cairn. Part of the remit of that thing was that we weren't allowed to disturb intact cairns, but where there were some that were eroding away, falling away, we were allowed to look at them, excavate them, and then sort of put them back and build them up afterwards. And this one was one that we excavated, and it's very frustrating as a historian working with archaeologists, because you think, yeah, just get a pickaxe to it, come on. No, you got your little trowel out, and it took about a week to get down sort of 6 inches. And are we ever going to find out what's in there? And initially they found a lot of big animal bones, and they couldn't work out whether it was horses or cattle, because it could just be that somebody buried their dead cow in there. But as they went down further, there were more and more bones, and then they came to a metal stud with some leather on it, which was from a harness, and eventually they decided there's between 4 and 6 horse bones in that pit there, and right at the bottom of it, when they got to the bottom, there were 2 human long bones in there as well, thigh bones. And what probably happened there, when they were burying the dead, they would obviously bury the people properly, but by the time they come down here, it would have been probably 6 months after the battle, so things are getting scattered. And probably at that stage, okay, let's clear up the dead horses and put them in, and somewhere these leg bones have been separated from the rest of the person, and somebody just thought, oh, that's a big bone, must be a horse, stick it in there. But then when we did a metal detector sweep over this bit here, we actually found the remains of the metal parts of the harnesses. So we found lots of buckles and lots of studs and all the bit that would have gone with the horses. There has in the past, anecdotally, somebody said to me, oh yeah, I found a Royal Artillery button there. Now, it is just conceivable, sort of 5% chance it isn't the limbers here. There was an ambulance wagon overrun as well, but on balance almost certainly, especially given the artillery button and all the rest of it, this is where the limbers came to grief. The Zulus left the limbers and obviously everybody dead here, but they took the guns away. Initially they were left on the battlefield, and King Petwayo said, well, what happened to the Zulus call them imbai-imbai, what happened to the imbai-imbai? And they said, well, they're still there. And he said, well, no, bring them to me. So men were sent out and they were dragged by hand from here pretty much up to Ulundi. After the war, they were found near Ulundi, which is 60 miles from here. So imagine dragging field guns by hand across 60 miles of country. And it's interesting because I've still had, talking to old Zulus, with tears in their eyes, who said on this very spot. Talking to old Zulus, I've had them say, oh, you know, they use the word imbai-imbai for artillery, and it goes way, way back. The first reference that I found was the Reverend Gardner, spelt differently to Kate's man, who was a missionary to King Dingaan. And he's got the story in there, and he says, oh, it's very curious because he was a Royal Naval man, that the Zulus call these things imbai-imbai. And the story that he has is that when Henry Francis Finn and co arrived at Durban in 1824, the first British settlers there, they unloaded a couple of ship's cannon, which they did. There's references to that. And the Zulus said to them, what are those things? And they said, oh, you'll find out by and by. and that word by and by has been attached to it ever since. And literally you can find the word in the old accounts and still in rural areas. I mean, probably these guys here would say, oh no, that was a 7-pounder rifle muzzle loader field gun. But off in rural areas where they don't have much to do with artillery, they still use that word in by, which is kind of weird that it goes right the way back to the very first, something as a metaphor in that somewhere there. So yeah, anyway, this is where the artillery came to grief. There's the last view of the mountain that they would have had if they looked back over their shoulder, thinking, I wish I hadn't taken the Queen's bloody shilling all those years ago.
Yeah.
Carrying, it must be really hard with all this rocky ground.
Well, they still have pickaxes and things, but initially they buried them just under the ground. They're not very